Our Jewish Fighters organization sent people out to the Aryan side to make arrangements for apartments, financial support, and so on. They had contact with Zegota, from which they received various sums of money. At that time, 500 zloty was quite a lot of money, because it was before the devaluation. Sometimes they got larger amounts and help for securing apartments and clothing. It depended on how much Zegota had available to distribute at the time. Aside from that, they helped hide Jewish children in monasteries. They also helped Jewish children who were hiding in the bombed-out ruins in Aryan Warsaw. They received financial aid through these contacts. These were among my associations with Zegota.
These are receipts which were signed by Jewish people who confirmed that they received financial help. These receipts were collected during 1 month, namely May 1944. Every few months, Heinrich Gruzinski made a financial report to the Jewish Aid Council. Here are 13 pages full of detailed records. And here you see the payments are marked and accounted for on the receipts. They were controlled by 2 Zegota vice chairmen who checked and signed each page and verified their accuracy. This is how they confirmed payments. These signatures here are those of the representatives of the Bund and Zionist Party, Reck and Feiner. A second very important issue was that of documents. Even for a regular Polish citizen, it was difficult to create forged documents. Where could you get them? You couldn't buy them in a store. One needed to know where and how to obtain them. And besides, some sources made good false documents, others poor ones, only to sell them and make some profit. The Zegota organization, however, had access to the best forgers. Among them were those of the Home Army, which had to prepare documents for their own intelligence workers who operated throughout Germany, using these documents to carry out various undercover operations. These forged documents had to be very good, and they were. From my own experience, and from my meetings with people who were helped, and with whom I still have contact today, people who were under my care, I have to say that Zegota might have been their last hope of rescue. They received documents and money, but not only that. More important was the feeling of moral support that they got. The awareness that there existed a group of people who were trying to care for them, that they weren't so alone. In Poland, life with forged Aryan documents was not easy, but the knowledge that someone was trying to help was the most important factor. I regard the Zegota activities very highly, not in terms of quantity of help, but rather in its quality. In terms of quantity, it is difficult to evaluate this help. When you use figures like 6 million murdered, for example, it is hard to compare that to the several thousands who were helped. And yet these were actually thousands of people who were helped, thousands who were saved, often at the last moment, thanks to this organization. I had under my responsibility a legalization activity which provided thousands of forged identification documents. And I know how many work permits and other forged documents we gave out to help these people, who I personally helped to make it through the war.
There were documents, so-called original, which were based on the birth certificates of deceased people. There were false documents, which had no legitimate substantiation. There were also false documents which were, through the help of the Home Army, substantiated among the legitimate documents in the city records. So for Zegota, there was a high level of paperwork activity involving files, records, and documents, aside from monetary help. All of this action was coordinated with the Home Army Legalization Office, which I believe was located on Kapusinska. I think much of this work was organized by Mr. Agato, an underground activist who parachuted in from London.
Other Zegota efforts were directed at helping the children, placing them in Polish families, where they were brought up as part of the family, or placing them in orphanages, particularly orphanages associated with Catholic monasteries. Public orphanages were used as well, as were those under the auspices of the Polish Welfare Society. The guardians sometimes knew that these were Jewish children, sometimes not. They were not generally informed, not because Zegota didn't trust these people, but rather because this was a clandestine organization which operated on the theory that the less people knew about it, the better.
Mrs. Irena Sendlerova, who was crippled in her service to Zegota.
The woman who reported me couldn't stand up to the beatings. She gave them my name. So the Germans learned that I belonged to an organization which helped Jews. The Germans beat me, tortured me, broke my feet and legs, and when they finished this, they condemned me to death. While this was happening, my Zegota colleagues did everything they could to free me, not only to help me personally, but also because I was the only one with coded information regarding 2,500 Jewish children who had been brought by Zegota to various hiding places, in monasteries as well as in private homes. And this file of information was hidden in my home. Thanks to fortunate circumstances, it never got into Nazi hands. My foster mother was a Zegota agent who worked with Mrs. Sendlerova.
Mrs. Elżbieta Ficowska recalls her experience as a former hidden child.
It was not planned at first that she would become my mother. She was a woman who was a midwife by profession. She worked out of her home on the east side of Warsaw. Thanks to the fact that this home was her property, she could issue birth certificates there, as well as forge papers and register people. Before the war, and later, she assisted as a midwife in the birth of Jewish children. All of this activity constantly kept her and her family in danger of being betrayed and receiving the death penalty. Additionally, Jewish children were brought to her, children she would place later in other safe houses. Of course, all of this action was directed and carried out with the assistance of Zegota contacts. I was brought to her when I was 5 months old. I was driven out of the ghetto in the back of a truck, inside a pile of bricks where I was concealed in a small wooden box with air holes. In that box, as a sleeping infant, I was driven to the Aryan side. I was taken to the home of this midwife, my mother-to-be, as it turned out, who at that time had prepared a safe home for me with a poor servant woman who lived on the outskirts of Warsaw. Since my mother took exceptional care of these matters, she discovered that the woman had tuberculosis. She then insisted that I not be turned over to her. After thinking about the situation and the fact that she herself was a widow and that her own children were adults and on their own, she decided that she would be the one to take care of me.
Mrs. Katarzyna Melach, also a former hidden child, shares with us her memory of the time.
In August 1942, I found myself at the Umschlagplatz when I was caught and brought there by police. It was simply by a miracle that I escaped from them. My family determined that I would have to be sent to a safe place. So shortly thereafter, I found myself on the Aryan side. This all sounds very simple now, but at the time it was quite different. I was guided out of the ghetto by a Jewish nurse who had official permission to travel between the Jewish and Aryan sides. Her unofficial function was to help get Jewish children to the other side. This was somehow well organized, surely by Zegota, although at that time I was not familiar with the name.
Among the many documents of the London-based Polish government in exile which were not returned to Poland after the war are those relating to Zegota activity.
I am Jadwiga Olszewska. We are in London in Polish underground movement Study Trust. I work here in archive, and here on the table we have a number of documents, some originals from the war years. And I would like to read a few lines from one of the leaflets which was published and distributed in Warsaw in May 1943. It was addressed to Poles. In an address to the people at home over the London radio on 5th of May 1943, the Prime Minister of the Polish government, General Sikorski, discussed the Germans' present criminal extermination of the Jews. General Sikorski said, "We know that you are aiding the suffering Jews as best you can. I thank you in the name of my government and on my own behalf. I beg you to give them all possible aid and also to resist this terrifying barbarity." All direct and indirect aiding to the Germans' criminals' action is the gravest offense against Poland. Every Pole who cooperates in the ruthless extermination, either by blackmailing or denouncing Jews, by exploiting their pitiful plight or taking part in looting, commits a grave crime in the light of the laws of the Polish Republic and will be punished without delay. It was signed by Polish Independence Organization, which was in fact Zegota.